This is For the Rest of Us with Canon Megan Castellan, a podcast about theology, faith, the Bible, and life. You know, for the rest of us. Well, hello there, you weirdos. Welcome back to For the Rest of Us with the Reverend Canon Megan Castellan. I am not the Reverend Canon Megan Castellan. You've figured that out by now, but I say it every week because it's kind of my thing. I am Adam Eichelberger. I work with Megan at the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York. I'm a lifelong Catholic, a relatively new Episcopalian, and she's just helping me kind of figure everything out because, boy, do I have questions. And you probably do too. You can kind of think of me like Alf.
Ignorance is no excuse.
Ignorance is your excuse all the time.
And she is just the Tanner family, helping me make sense of this wacky world that we live in through the lens of the Episcopal faith. Megan, I'm going to timestamp this a little bit.
Okay.
We are recording this. Today is Thursday, January 15th, and it's been a wild 2 weeks in 2026. And I know that we've got some stuff to talk about, and you wanted to maybe mention a little bit of that as we're looking at things. So, Megan, what do you got for the rest of us this episode?
So a very strange thing has happened. The Episcopal Church appears to be in the zeitgeist, which is not a place we normally find ourselves. Since Prince Harry married Meghan Markle, we have not really been in the popular conversation. So I thought we would talk about that. This past week, there was a shooting in Minneapolis. ICE agent shot and killed an unarmed mother named Renee Good, who was with her wife and her children, trying to protect their neighborhood and their family from an ICE raid. And footage from several vantage points immediately went online. And I'm not going to rehash it. You've probably seen it. It was really brutal. So protests erupted across the nation. At one of the protests on Saturday night, the Episcopal Bishop of New Hampshire, Rob Hirschfeld, gave a speech. And he spoke about how he felt the church was re-entering a time of martyrs. And he said he had instructed his clergy to get their affairs in order, to have their wills written, because it may be that we are called to put our bodies between the powers of this world and the most vulnerable as a concrete testimony to the love of God that we witness to. And I heard the speech sort of Saturday night as it was happening. It kind of came across my Episcopal news feed, and I was like, oh, okay, nice speech. That's good. Yep, stuff we believe. What I didn't expect was Sunday morning to see that clip everywhere. It broke containment on social media. It started to show up on my TikTok feed and shared by people on social media who are not church people, are political people who do not frequent the halls of churches. And their reaction was one of, I think, sort of pleased shock is the way I would characterize it. People seemed really shocked and surprised that someone from inside the church was saying this. My first thought when I heard it was, yeah, this is, sometimes you gotta do the thing. And he's in New Hampshire. He's probably talking about Jonathan Daniels. And on Sunday, I got a hold of the whole speech. And sure enough, he was talking about Jonathan Myrick Daniels. But what I realized in seeing the reaction kind of come in through social media was that I guess a lot of people don't know that Episcopalians have a very real theology of martyrdom in our own little kind of unexpected way that we do talk about, apparently not as publicly as I had thought we do. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is Jonathan Myrick Daniels and our little theology of martyrdom. But before we get into that, this is a nerdy thing and I want to throw it out there. The thing about wills is literally in the prayer book. It's been in all of the prayer books since 1662. It used to be in the prayer book in the service where you would go say prayers with a sick person. The minister was instructed to remind the sick person that it was their job while they were well to create a will for the care of their family, for the dispersal of their estate, for the relief of whoever came after them. That it was the solemn duty of whoever was the minister in that place to make sure everybody had a will. Because death was real, death was probably around the corner, make sure everybody has a will. That instruction is still in our prayer book. It's for some reason stuck at the end of Thanksgiving for a child, which I don't know why. But if you look on page 445 of your prayer book, it says, the minister shall instruct the congregation from time to time that it is their solemn Christian duty to make sure that they have provided for the care of their family.
Well, I just learned something new.
Yeah, it's like, it's one of those things that we don't talk about. But yeah, according to the prayer book, have a will. Everybody has a will. So when he was like, I've told everyone to have a will. And I was like, well, of course you have. Gotta have a will.
I'm not gonna lie, when I first heard that, like, it sounded kind of dark. And I was a little surprised. I was like, wow, this is like a pretty bold thing to say. But I mean, now that I understand it's from the prayer book, I guess that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I don't know for sure that he was thinking, yeah, it's on page 445. Everybody needs to have a will. I mean, I think I can't speak for him, but I am a nerd.
Nerd alert!
And so my first thought was, yeah, it's a rubric in the prayer book. Of course, everybody has to have a will. But it is sort of one of the amusing things to me about the Episcopal tradition is that we have an earnest streak that comes across and it's really going to show up in what we're going to talk about today. But it also kind of shows up in, make sure you have a will. Take care of your kids. Don't stress out your executor with, having a ton of china. Like, plan for this stuff. It's part of your Christian responsibility. So the Bishop of New Hampshire, in his longer speech, references Jonathan Daniels specifically as a kind of proto-Episcopal martyr. And when I thought about how Anglicans understand martyrdom, he is kind of the lens through which we talk about martyrdom the most often. Jonathan Myrick Daniels was sort of your quintessential mid-century Episcopalian, right? He was born in Keene, New Hampshire in 1939. Good family, highly educated, went to all the right schools, valedictorian at Virginia Military Institute, Harvard undergrad, then went to Episcopal Divinity School in Boston, in Cambridge, right by Harvard, like, stereotypical waspy Episcopalian of great privilege. While he's in seminary, he's going into his senior year, Bloody Sunday happens in Alabama, 1965. Martin Luther King tries to lead a parade of marchers across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma to protest in favor of voting rights, and they are violently confronted and turned back by law enforcement. Several people are killed. And this was something that the Episcopal Church at the time was really paying attention to, particularly in the Northeast. We have records from the church where I was rector, St. John's in Ithaca, that the vestry was following this as it happened. And they received word that several of the marchers that day tried to seek shelter in an Episcopal church in Selma and were turned away by the rector. And so the vestry of St. John's, Ithaca, wrote scathing letters to the Central New York bishop, to the Bishop of Alabama, to the rector of that parish, wanting to know what in God's name could the possible excuse be for turning away people who needed help. So this was something that people were really, particularly in this part of the country, really paying attention to. That week, Martin Luther King goes on the radio, makes a radio address specifically appealing to religious leaders of all faith traditions, all denominations across the country to come and join him in another attempt to get across the bridge and complete the pilgrimage in favor of voting rights. And Jonathan Daniels hears the radio announcement and then goes to evensong at his seminary chapel. And as he's at evensong, he recites the words of the Magnificat. And he says later in his journal that he was really struck in that moment by reciting Mary's words, the powerful are cast down, the lowly lifted up. And he said, in that moment, I knew I had to go to Selma. So he goes. He and a number of his classmates quit seminary. They take a leave of absence. They go down south. They work on voter registration. They march across the bridge with Martin Luther King. They work on integrating the local Episcopal Church, which did not make them popular. And they worked on connecting disenfranchised Black citizens with resources for food, education, organizing opportunities throughout the semester. Initially, they were only supposed to be down there like a week. They kept extending the stay, and eventually they came back to take their exams to end the semester, and then they went immediately back down south. In August, they were still doing this organizing work. Jonathan and 5 others, white and Black, had joined a picket line in favor of voting rights, and they were arrested. They were held in jail, ended up being about 6 days because they decided amongst themselves that no one person would leave until all of them were bailed out because it was too risky. So finally, they all get bailed out. They are kind of dumped in Haynesville, Alabama, which is a little town. Sort of think of a stereotypical little southern town in the 1960s. This is probably what you're thinking of. It's the middle of the afternoon. They had been in jail for 6 days. They hadn't had much to eat or drink, and they're tired and they are thirsty, and they go to the general store in town. And as they go up on the porch, white man comes by and starts threatening them with a shotgun, telling them to get off the porch. The white man points the shotgun at the Black girl who was with them, 16-year-old named Ruby Sales, and Jonathan steps in front of her to shield her. The white man shoots, and Jonathan is hit in the stomach and chest and dies immediately. The group starts running. So that man who shot him, Tom Coleman, was put on trial for manslaughter, not murder. He pled self-defense. He was acquitted in less than an hour by an all-white jury. He lived a long life. He died in 1997 of cancer. Meanwhile, Ruby Sales, the girl that Jonathan protected, has gone on to become a renowned civil rights activist in her own right and devoted Episcopalian. She shows up to things every so often. But this story broke in the news when it happened. Kind of, it wasn't a huge deal, but again, people were watching, people noticed this happen. And this was, within the church at least, kind of a galvanizing force. And it did make the church kind of stop and reconsider what was happening. He was declared a martyr of the church in 1991, and his feast day is August 17th. I think it's August 17th. Ever since then, Episcopalians go on pilgrimage to Haynesville, Alabama, to the church that he integrated, to talk to the families that he stayed with and the people that he worked with. The church is very small, and so I know people who were in seminary with him, and we'll talk about what that was like. One of the things that made this story really kind of shake the church was that everyone knows everyone. You can't escape it. And so, when he died, it was like, oh, he was ours. This story was a very big deal. And it remains a very big deal in kind of the meta-narrative of the Episcopal Church. When we talk about what it means to be a faithful Christian, Jonathan Myrick Daniels is kind of a lot of times the icon of what it means, both to kind of reassure ourselves that we did the right thing during civil rights, which is okay. But also, there's something really Anglican about the story and kind of how earnest and straightforward it is. The same thing with the wills in the Book of Common Prayer. Here's somebody who was raised in a place of immense privilege, but he goes to church, finds faith, and decides to take that faith seriously. So he, acts on the words of the Magnificat and ends up in a completely different place than he did before. And that is sort of what a lot of Episcopalians recognize as something that's very core to how we understand the gospel. There's like an interior earnestness to Jonathan's story that I think we also kind of aspire to. We have quirks, we have liturgical trappings, but at the heart of it, we don't play. When we say the Magnificat, we're saying it because we believe it. When we pray these prayers, we're praying them because we believe them and we're trying to live them out. There's a core earnestness that I think is really true to the heart of our tradition. People are people and injustice is wrong and Christ came for everyone. And when it comes down to it, this is something we need to stand up for. And so when the Bishop of New Hampshire said, I think, we may be in a time of martyrdom again. Yeah, he's speaking out of the experience of Jonathan Daniels and saying, there's a part of our tradition that says we don't play with this. There's, if you live like the gospel matters, then there's going to come a time when you have to make a choice. And the Episcopal Church for a long time has said, that choice is going to be big, probably, and it will be scary. But it's also pretty clear.
It's interesting because, when we look at, how Christianity kind of gets treated specifically in America, for a long time, there's kind of been this martyrdom fetish.
Yeah.
Among especially evangelical churches. It's like they're looking for it. They're ready for it. I can't remember the name. I think it was a documentary. I think it was called Church Camp or something like that.
Yeah.
Where they look at these kids and they're doing this whole performance about martyrdom. And I remember even in my own context being a Catholic, this was something that was talked about, they're looking for it.
Right.
And it's interesting to see how we as Episcopalians treat this. This is part of your duty, but it's not like we're going out there trying to go die for the gospel or anything.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely shouldn't try for it. And I was trying to parse out in my mind what made this different than the Jesus Camp stuff. And I remember there was that whole conversation really post Columbine about, if somebody asked you with a gun to your face, if you believed in Jesus, what would you say? I think the difference here kind of comes out of the example of the earliest martyrs. If you read the narratives of Polycarp and Irenaeus and Perpetua and Felicity, and particularly the narratives of the bishops who were martyred, they talk about really struggling and going back and forth about whether they should go ahead and allow themselves to be arrested and martyred, or if they should evade arrest. Which would be better for the church? Should they go ahead and give themselves up, knowing, not try and evade the arrest? Or should they live to fight another day? Which would be the more faithful option? And Irenaeus, I think, and Ignatius of Antioch like several times get out of the arrest and then go back because they decide that it's ultimately better for the church if they live to fight another day rather than go ahead and be martyred. The kind of overall idea is that, it's not about you, it's about what you're giving your life in service for. And it really doesn't, martyrdom is not a crown of glory for you because you're so cool. It's what will best serve the gospel, what will best serve the people around you. In Greek and in Hebrew and in Arabic, the word martyr means witness. So in both Hebrew and Arabic, because of how their language works, it also is linked to the words believe and testify. So in Islam, when you make an affirmation of faith, you say the shahada, which means belief, affirmation, creed. And a martyr is shaheed. So it's the same root word. So a martyr is someone in the oldest meaning of the word, who is so invested in witnessing and testifying and living into the reality of God's resurrection life against the power of death, that they do not give in to what the world asks of them, even at the cost of their own life. It's about being so rooted in the reality of God's resurrection power that nothing the powers of this world can do, up to and including death, are going to move you out of that story. And so it shifts the onus from, are you going to believe in Jesus in the right way and the showiest way, or are you going to live as a witness to the story of God however you can, whether that means you live or die, so that life or death becomes the less important part. And I remember when I was confirmed, and I was a cheeky 12-year-old, our rector had told us at some point in class that in the olden days, bishops used to slap you. And so when the bishop came, I was like, oh, are you going to slap us? Because nobody else was asking questions. And I thought I should. And he said, oh, yeah, I'm going to slap you. And I was like, oh, no. And he said, look, and this was Franklin Turner. I'll never forget him. He said, look, this is not easy. This is not an easy life. These promises mean something. And you need to know going in that being Christian is not easy. The world is not going to reward you for this. Keeping these promises to resist evil, work for justice, love your neighbor, you are not always going to have an easy time with it. And you need to know it's not going to be a cakewalk. So he did. He gave it like the gentlest of like taps on the face. But I'll always remember that, him being like, you need to know going in when you make these promises, this is not going to be easy. And it's not going to be about you. And I think, when we talk about martyrdom and when we talk about living a faithful Christian life, ultimately, the freedom that gives us is to know that it's not about us, which is kind of cool because when it's too much about us, we get very, very anxious. But also, the question of living or dying is sort of off the table. That the most important thing is not my personal survival. My personal survival may be helpful. It's really good. I don't want to go anywhere. But God is going to be in charge no matter what. God is going to take care of everybody no matter what. And there's a bigger picture to worry about.
It's interesting too, like when I think about it, when I think about what martyrdom looks like in this context, and especially going back to what we were talking about a minute ago, about how my whole idea of martyrdom for the longest time was like you said, like the post-Columbine, like someone's going to put a gun in your face and be like, right. Are you a Christian or not? And then they're going to gun you down in cold blood. And really, when you look at the examples of martyrdom, like you talk about like Maximilian Kolbe, you talk about all like the great martyr, like it is literally laying down your life for someone else. And ultimately, and this is something we've talked about, both you and I individually, and I think we've talked about it on the podcast before, but it's literally using privilege to come to the aid of somebody who doesn't have the same privilege that we have. And that call that I heard from the Bishop of New Hampshire is less about like, hey, get ready, go out and get looking for it. Like, it's about like, it's like you said, this is the duty and this is on the table, be ready. Like you said, like this is not something that we shy away from, and it's in service to others instead of service to ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when in college, when I took the class about Oscar Romero and we were learning about him for the first time, there were people in the class about evangelicals who argued that he could not possibly be a Christian martyr because he did not affirm the name of Jesus when he died. Like even though he was literally assassinated at the altar while celebrating Mass because of what he was doing on behalf of the poor and the oppressed in El Salvador, because Christians as a whole were not a persecuted minority in El Salvador, he could not be a martyr. And I remember thinking that is the weirdest understanding of martyrdom, and so like narrow. He gave his life on behalf of others. He talked about it in explicit like explicitly terms that mirror the old martyr narratives, like, if I die, I will rise again in the people of El Salvador, like the whole thing. And they were like, no, martyrdom has to be someone asks you if you affirm the name of Christ and you say yes, and then they kill you. Like a very cut and dry. And that is too small a thing for what God wants for the world, and too small a thing for what we're called to, and definitely a very limited understanding of how tricky evil can be. Good Lord, particularly the way we're seeing it right now. I did see someone online talking about whether Renee Good was a martyr, and I found it interesting that we had an earlier, very visible, violent murder on social media, and many people were very quick to assign the title of martyr to that individual. And we have not had the same mad rush to call Renee Good a martyr. That is a decision ultimately for the wider church that takes time. But I do think her response to a man who has a gun in her face and who is clearly furious at her constant response of, I'm not mad at you, that she refuses to shy away from, even as it costs her life, I think is at the very least something to emulate. She met anger and violence with compassion and peace. And she was a Christian. She attended church. And I think, that's on the road to what we need to aspire to, meeting that kind of anger and violence with love and compassion, even when it doesn't protect our own life.
It's a hard reality for us to face. And it's one of the really hard things about, I don't want to use like I don't want to be glib. I guess glib is the right word. Like one of the hardest things about like the Christian life is entertaining these ideas. Like we are, one of the oldest sayings that I learned about our history as Christians is the phrase memento mori, like remember your death. Like we are called to be mindful of that. And again, listeners, friends, we're trying our best to not be a total downer all the time.
We do try. I know it doesn't sound like it, but I swear we try.
But this isn't, it's something for us to constantly have in the back of our minds and be ready to move it to the front of our minds when it calls for it. I think that one of the best things that we can do, listeners, especially in a time like this, is be mindful of everything that's going on around us. And after we're mindful of it, take it to prayer. And I know that sounds like I'm trying to be quaint about it, but like in all honesty, the thing that we need most of all in times like this, when things are really hard, is to pray about these really hard things, but then don't let it just stay there. Let it move us into action, to use our voices and to use our means and to use our bodies to do what it is that we can to live out what Jesus literally commands us to do, to stand for the oppressed. And I just mentioned this to our bishop the other day. One of those things that I learned really early on was the most common phrase that's used in the canon of scripture is some permutation of be not afraid. Do not be afraid. And it is a time for us to move out of fear into boldness. And like Megan said, we're not trying to run around looking for opportunities to be martyred, but it's a time for that level of boldness.
And I will just add this. The only tools the empire has are violence and death. That's it. That's the end of their toolbox. That's all they have. Our Christian hope lies in the knowledge that death cannot stand up to God. So congratulations, the empire may kill people, and it will be awful. It is awful when people die. We do not want that. And also, we have the resurrection. We know that death is not forever, and death cannot defeat the love of God, the will of God, the resolve of God to make this broken world into what God wants. So ultimately, our hope is that the empire shakes these weapons in our face and tells us that we have to be afraid and we have to bow down. But this is all that they've got. And we know, because we know the ending of the story, that these are not worth being afraid of. And I think that's really kind of the moral of the story. Death and violence are not worth being afraid of. They're horrible and they are awful, and we should submit no one to them. But we know that it cannot stop the will of God, and they should not intimidate us.
I could not agree with you more. All right. So in our best effort to try and end on a little bit of an upward swing, something for us to think about, because we always ask Megan something. If there was one of your favorite things that you had to give up for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Ooh, what kind of favorite thing? Like food, drink?
Anything. It could be like your favorite meal. It could be like your comfort show. It could be like your favorite hobby. Like you had to give up one. And don't be like, well, I really like hot dogs, so I'm not going to eat hot dogs or whatever. Dig deep. What would be your favorite thing that you would give up for the rest of your life if you had to give up one thing?
Ooh, I mean, this is hard. I mean, I like things, so that's why I do them. Don't want to give them up. I will say this is a small thing, but it's one of my things that I really like. I put lemon in a lot of things. So I put lemon in Diet Coke. I put lemon in my water. I think giving up lemons forever would drive me nuts.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Because it would make water much less fun to drink, and much less palatable. It would make iced tea much less palatable, like Diet Coke. I think so. Yeah, giving up lemons would be a very small thing, yet a constant irritant for me.
Yeah, and you'd be mindful of it like all the time.
Yep.
Because that memory is just rattling around. Like, remember when I used to have lemons and all this stuff?
Remember when lemons existed? Yeah. Now watch, climate change will probably knock out lemons like the next 5 years.
So listeners, I'm just curious. Let us know in the comments. If you had to give up one thing for the rest of your life, one of your favorite things, what would it be and why? Hey, thank you so much for being along this ride with us. Make sure you tell a friend. Make sure you leave us a review. If you haven't subscribed, hey, it does a ton to help the show. Make sure you do that. We can't wait to talk to you next time on For the Rest of Us. Thanks for stopping by and checking out For the Rest of Us with Ken and Megan. If you like the show, maybe subscribe, share it with a friend, leave us a review, and we hope to see you again next time. For the Rest of Us is a production of the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York.